Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Invasion by P. Corcoran. Narrated by Eric Michael Summerer. Chapter 1. The Die is Cast. When Lord Harvick received the summons to appear before Lavin the 11th, Gurrent of the K'Tai Imperium, he had thought he would be ordered to take his command against yet another secessionist system. A mission which was becoming all too common among the fleet, and one which Harvick felt a growing unease in carrying out. As Harvick entered the citadel, the ancestral home of the Lavin family since the earliest days of their centuries-old dynasty and the beating heart of the K'Tai Imperium, he felt the weight of history bear heavily on his broad shoulders as his footsteps rang on the worn cobbles and echoed from the ancient walls encompassing the citadel. The historic fortress dominated the skyline of the K'Tai Imperium's capital city of Farak, a sprawling metropolis covering over 243,000 square kilometers of the planet Tarava's surface, like some giant leech made of concrete and metal. A population of 200 million serviced the bureaucratic needs of an imperium which held sway over 300 star systems. As tradition demanded, Harvick paused as he reached the center of the courtyard, for here, gazing down upon all who entered the citadel, was the 100-meter-tall statue of Rig. Positioned equidistantly along the circumference of the statue were the guardians of his teaching, the K'tai, their pure white armor polished to a point where Harvick saw his face reflected in their chest plates. The K'tai were promoted as the epitome of the K'tai warrior. Standing 2 meters tall, their dark blue skin served to highlight their unblinking, ice-blue eyes, which stared out from below thick, heavily boned cranial plates, which curved down sharply to meet at a pointed jaw. Their shaven heads were uncovered, so all and sundry saw their cold, hard faces, and recognized without doubt that they were ready and willing to use the gleaming, deadly pulse rifles held in gauntleted hands to protect the figure of the K'Tai, whose teachings shaped their very souls. Rig was the first Gurrent, a warrior noble who, through force of arms and sheer willpower, unified the warring houses of the K'Tai over 2,000 years earlier into one nation and set the K'Tai on the course to greatness. Rig had taken on a near religious place in the heart of the K'Tai warriors. His teachings on honor, fealty, and respect for one's foe had become the cornerstone which shaped the Imperium as it encompassed its homeworld before spreading out among the stars to become the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known. The thick stone walls of the citadel saw many a foe waste themselves on its impenetrable walls and gates. However, there were things that even the strongest physical defenses could not protect from, and one of those things is idealism. An idea had found fertile ground among the growingly disenfranchised masses. The idea that all K'Tai are born equal, no matter your lineage. This idea had spread to encompass the 2 subjugated races of the Imperium. The Sona had been conquered 2,000 years before, and were regarded by most pure-blood K'Tai as little more than semi-intelligent laborers. The Valen, in comparison, had been fully integrated into K'Tai society. The Valen were to be found in every great house and at the heart of the industrial and economic centers that those houses controlled. They might have red skin and physically differ from the K'Tai, but only a fool would think that without their unfaltering service, the Imperium could remain as strong as it was. Now, though, the voices of dissent whispered in dark corners and in small gatherings. Slowly but surely, the voices gathered strength, and then the unimaginable occurred. Tarat, youngest son of the Gurrent, came out as a supporter of those calling for a change to the age-old system. Before the Imperium could react, Tarat became the leader of these secessionists, and several more mayor, the provincial governors, had joined him. The Imperium faced a de facto civil war, its first in its 3,000-year history. The aging Gurrent was mortally wounded by his youngest son's betrayal. It was said that he was no longer capable of handling the day-to-day running of the Imperium, and this responsibility was now taken on by the Devisi, the designated heir of the Gurrent, his eldest son, Sidal. So lost in his thoughts was Harvick that he failed to notice the approach of the Valen, whose purple robes identified him as a member of the Gurrent's personal household staff. "My Lord Harvick," the Valen said with his chin tucked into his chest. With a wave of his hand, Harvick released him to continue speaking. "I have been given the honor of being your escort, if you will follow me." Harvick nodded his assent before trailing the Valen into and through the Great Hall, an imposing building where the Gurrent would hold grand formal dinners below a high, arched ceiling, hand-painted with the symbols of every noble house. Reaching the far end of the hall, the Valen servant halted. A solitary member of the Devasee's own house guard stood post before a set of exquisitely carved wooden doors. Without the usual pomp and ceremony that accompanied the arrival of a noble of an important house, such as Harvick, he was shown into the crown room. As the doors closed behind him, Harvick noted the gilded seat reserved for the Gurrent was empty, while the chair to its right, the position of the Devasee, was occupied by Sidal. It took Harvick a moment to realize that apart from the two of them, the room was empty. Harvick was too long in the tooth to be fooled by the apparent lack of any guards or aides. Every square inch of the room was undoubtedly covered by surveillance cameras, with armed guards behind every door ready to spring to the Devasee's defense if they perceived a threat. Nevertheless, Harvick understood the gesture for what it was. Sidal was indicating the level of trust and confidence he had in the older K'Tai warrior. Rising from his chair, Sidal came forward to greet the Imperium's premier fleet commander. "Welcome, Lord Harvick. May I offer you a drink? Larak wine, perhaps? The Citadel's cellars hold a fine vintage." Harvick tried not to let Sidal's overtly friendly welcome faze him. Anyone who believed that Sidal had any room in his heart for friendship was an idiot. The oldest son of the Gurrent was a shrewd politician who had spent the last 2 decades being groomed for the day he would ascend to the throne of the Imperium. And if rumor was correct, he had replaced the aging Gurrent in everything but name. The fact that the Gurrent himself was not present at this meeting only lent credence to the rumors of his failing health. "Perhaps a small glass, Your Highness. My time in the Oslav system has not allowed me much in the way of the finer things in life." Sidal poured the older K'Tai a glass of the fine red wine and gestured for him to sit. Harvick did as he was instructed, shifting his weight in the plush seat, a far cry from his usual no-frills command chair aboard the fleet carrier Wallach. Harvick waited for Sidal to take a sip of his wine before following suit. There was, after all, a strict protocol to be followed, no matter how friendly the environment seemed. Sidal eyed the man that had been his father's most trusted military advisor and close friend since both had been young men in the service of the then Gurrent Caral III, Sidal's grandfather. Lord Harvick might be as old as his father, but he showed no signs of being bowed by the heavy weight of commanding the premier strike fleet in the entire Imperium. In fact, it appeared to Sidal that the opposite was true, and Harvick could easily have passed for a man 20 years his junior. Harvick, for his part, kept his face emotionless as he waited in respectful silence for the heir to the throne to speak. "My father and the entire Imperium rejoice at the news that you were able to return Oslav and those citizens loyal to the Imperium once more to our lawful control. It is unfortunate that the traitor Balal and his secessionist followers were able to take their own lives before being put on trial for their crimes." A questioning frown creased Harvick's high forehead. "Claviger Balal is dead? There must be some mistake, Your Highness. The Claviger and his troops surrendered. I personally negotiated directly with him. Once my fleet had obtained control of the high orbits and the Black Legion had secured the ground around his palace, he had little choice if he was to prevent any undue civilian casualties. When I received your summons to return to the Citadel, he and his troops were alive and well in the custody of Lady Kara. I doubt very much that she or her legion would allow harm to come to him." Sidal slowly twirled the delicate stem of the wine-glass in his fingers. "After your recall, Balal and his fellow traitors were transferred to the custody of the K'tai, shortly after which they attempted a mass escape. The K'tai were forced to open fire. There were no survivors. It appears Balal was not willing to face the humiliation of a public trial and its no doubt guilty verdict." Sidal's blasé statement that the former claviger of Oslav and 1,500 of his loyal troops had been killed by the K'tai caused the blood to drain from Harvick's face, strong fingers tightening around the fine stem of the magnificent crystal glass, threatening to snap it. Harvick struggled to contain his anger, and his voice came out low and barely under control. "Your Highness, I made a personal promise to Balal that he and his men would be treated in accordance with the teachings of Rig. Their deaths are a stain on my honor, and that of my house." Sidal waved his wine-glass in the air dismissively, a sly smile on his lips. "Nonsense, Lord Harvick. You are in no way responsible for their deaths. You negotiated their surrender in good faith. How were you to know that those traitorous scum were planning to escape? For all you know, that may have been their plan all along. These secessionists have no honor. If anything, the K'tai have saved the Imperium the expense of a trial." Harvick slowly placed his glass on the table's surface. Its fine vintage now felt bitter in his mouth. Carefully he constructed his next question, praying that he did not receive the reply he feared would shame his house forever. "And what of the claviger's family and those of his followers?" "Ah, yes, I believe they are also in the custody of the K'tai and are awaiting transportation to re-education camps." A chill ran down Harvick's spine. Would there be another attempted breakout? Another excuse for the K'tai to rid Sidal of an unwanted problem? Harvick, like all K'tai, had been raised with the teachings of Rig. During the Wars of Unification, Rig had stood above the others by showing compassion to his defeated enemies, turning many into allies by showing clemency. Throughout his long career, Harvick had striven to follow his example, and it was one of the many reasons that he had risen to such prominence in the forces of the Imperium. The K'tai, on the other hand, had become a byword for dishonor. Harvick doubted that any of the relatives and friends of the defeated Balal would make it to a re-education camp. Rig demanded that he do his best to secure their safety. But how to word it? "If I may make a suggestion, Your Highness." Sidal was surprised that the older K'tai would be so forward with the heir to the throne. Perhaps after his next task, a suggestion should be made that he retire to his estates. Sidal's sly smile morphed into a welcoming one. "Please, Lord Harvick, how could I not listen to a suggestion from one so experienced as yourself?" The attempt at sarcasm washed over Harvick like the pathetic attempt that it was. "With the secessionists defeated in the Oslav sector, the K'tai must be at full stretch to investigate and arrest any trace elements of the treachery. Perhaps Lady Kara and the Black Legion may be able to shoulder some of the K'tai's burden. If the claviger's family and remaining followers were returned to her custody, then she could ensure their safe transport to the re-education camps, freeing up the K'tai for more important tasks." Sidal regarded Harvick for a moment with suspicious eyes. What was he up to? Sidal dismissed the thoughts. Harvick was most likely only following some misguided Rig honor code, and besides, his idea made sense. The K'tai could ill afford the resources required to move large numbers of prisoners, while Lady Kara and the Black Legion were scheduled for a period of rest and refitting following the fierce fighting in Oslav. The system's space-based industrial complexes had been of such value to the Imperium that it precluded Lord Harvick's fleet from simply reducing them to expanding clouds of stellar dust. Harvick's ships had had to fight their way into the heavily defended system, defenses which had included a substantial number of heavy fleet units loyal to the now deceased Claviger Balat's house. Harvick had taken a significant number of casualties before overcoming the Claviger's spaceborne forces and getting close enough for a successful assault by the Black Legion to retake the vital infrastructure. The secessionists had fought hard. However, the Black Legion were the best soldiers in the entire Imperium, and they had won the day. The reports which reached Sidal were akin to the tales of old. Lady Kara had led every assault personally. Many considered it a mistake by the Gurrent to allow Lady Kara to succeed her father as head of the House of Rala following his unfortunate death. There had been whispers that perhaps the Gurrent was showing her undue favor, and that it would be better for the Gurrent to insist that Lady Kara should wed another of noble blood, so that her house might be combined with another. There would have been no end of potential suitors for Lady Kara, for she was as beautiful as she was deadly. In the end, though, the Gurrent had decreed that the young Kara should take on the mantle of head of her house and, as was her right, commander of the Black Legion. Lady Kara soon silenced her doubters as she proved time after time that she was indeed her father's daughter, leading the Black Legion in a series of stunning victories against the enemies of the Imperium. The Gurrent's decision to combine the wisdom of Lord Harvick with the impetuous nature of Lady Kara had resulted in a finely edged sword that had yet to fail the Imperium. Sidal allowed himself an appreciative sip of his Larek wine, keeping Harvick waiting for his answer. When he judged that he was reaching the end of what was polite, he answered. "As usual, my lord, I see that you have a firm grasp of the situation. The Chemtac are indeed required for more pressing duties. Only yesterday I was forced to dispatch units of my own palace guard to bolster their presence in the Paral sector after Claviger Warren announced that he was breaking his sworn oath of loyalty and siding with Tarava." The strength of venom that Sidal's statement finished with took Harvick by surprise, but not as much as the news that Warren had thrown his lot in with the secessionists. Warren had always been a loyal supporter of the Imperium, and his house was nearly as old as Harvick's own, though far wealthier, for the Paral sector was the Imperium's main supplier of Redlazore, the key mineral in the only known functioning star drive. With the flow of Redlazore from Paral blocked, it would only be a matter of time before the Imperium exhausted its remaining stockpiles, effectively rendering the Imperium's starships nothing more than expensive heaps of metal. Harvick now grasped the real reason that he had been summoned to the Citadel. He was to lead his fleet against that of Warren and secure the Redlazore mines. Harvick placed his glass on the table and stood with a sense of urgency, which was swiftly replaced by puzzlement as Sidal continued to sit holding his delicate wineglass. "Your Highness, that is indeed troubling news. With your permission, I would like to return to my ship and begin immediate plans to retake Paral." The raised hand of Sidal halted him mid-sentence. "Units have already been dispatched to Paral, my lord, with orders to blockade the sector." "Please." Sidal indicated Harvick's vacant seat. Harvick's sense of puzzlement returned as he retook his seat and awaited Sidal's explanation. "If I may beg your indulgence, my lord, what do you think the effect of a blockade of the Paral sector will be?" Harvick's puzzlement turned to caution. Sidal was an experienced strategist, and the effect of a blockade must be as obvious to him as it was to Harvick. Was the heir to the throne testing him? Testing him to see if he would give an honest answer, or the one that Sidal expected from some sycophant who only wanted to ingratiate himself? Well, Harvick was too old and too weary to disguise the truth. "A simple blockade of Paral will have the effect of cutting off the supply of Redlazore to both loyal Imperium forces and those of the secessionists. If the blockade holds, Then eventually both sides will exhaust their supplies, and both sides' fleets will be incapable of interstellar action. The conflict will simply grind to a halt through lack of mobility. Sidal pointed a long finger at Harvick to emphasize his point. Exactly, my lord. Peral is the only major source of Redlazore in the entire Imperium. With neither side having access to it, then the war is a stalemate. Unless... Harvick leaned in toward Sidal, eager to hear more. Unless what, Your Highness? The smile that spread across Sidal's lips was one of satisfaction. He had the older warrior's full attention. What if the Imperium had access to a nearly unlimited supply of Redlazore? A supply which I want you, my lord, and Lady Kara, to secure for me. The look of confusion on Harvick's face only made Sidal's smile grow. But you have said so yourself, Your Highness. There are no other sources of Redlazore within the Imperium. The original mines on Rove and Kula are long exhausted. Peral has been our only source of the mineral for a generation, unless by some great fortune and in the greatest secrecy you have discovered an alternative source. Sidal enjoyed his fleeting moment of one-upmanship as Harvick keenly awaited the smiling Sidal to reveal his secret. Not at all, my lord. I intend to take what we need from the humans. On the planet the humans call Agate are deposits of Redlazore, which make those on Peral pale in comparison. You will plan and execute an operation to seize and hold Agate. In a single stroke, we will neutralize human expansion on our borders and rid ourselves of the secessionists once and for all. Sidal sat back in his comfortable seat as he watched Harvick process what he had just said. For the older warrior's part, he fought back the urge to stare in disbelief at the audaciousness of Sidal's plan, instead allowing time for his brain to consider the idea. An idea which, when he got over the initial shock, had merit. For years, the humans had been pressing up to the borders of the Imperium as they rushed to colonize any world where they could scratch out a meager living. Their expansion had only been limited by their meager supply of the essential Redlazore. The humans had been in trade talks with the Imperium to negotiate access to the Redlazore mines on Peral, but the Imperium's negotiating team had, much to the humans' frustration, successfully blocked them at every turn. However, with the discovery of the massive deposits on Agate, the Imperium had lost its most important card in the negotiations. A move by the Imperium to take Agate would put them back in control of the supply of Redlazore again, and therefore in control of human expansion. On the other hand, the Imperium had not launched a war of expansion for over 200 years. Fighting the secessionists was one thing, but fighting another multi-star species was something else entirely. From deep within his mind, Harvick accessed what he knew about the humans' fighting ability. Since the Imperium had first encountered them, the humans had fought 2 major interstellar wars, both of which they had won. The most recent conflict had been with the Laurentian Confederation. The Confederation was roughly twice as large as the Human League of Planets, and had been widely expected to defeat the humans easily. In a move which had shocked observers, the humans had launched a surprise attack on the capital world of the Confederation, which had succeeded in forcing the Confederation to sue for peace under the gun barrels of human warships in orbit. The human victory had left no doubt in anyone's mind that they had a proficient military led by competent leaders. Nevertheless, the K'Tai Imperium was several orders of magnitude larger than the Confederation. The fleet that Harvick alone commanded was equal to that fielded by the Confederation during the entire war, and the defenses on and around Tarava would not be so easily circumvented by an attacking force, as had happened to the Confederation homeworld. The strategist in Harvick worked the problem of how to secure Agate. The world was right on the border between the Imperium and human-controlled space, which meant that there would be no requirement to take and hold any other human worlds en route to Agate. The nearest human naval base was in the sector capital of Doberman, so it was unlikely that he would encounter any substantial naval opposition, although that would need to be firmed up by good intelligence, along with anything they could dig up on planetary defenses and likely ground opposition that the Black Legion would face. The only fly in the ointment was the reaction of the humans to their primary source of Redlazore being taken from them. Surely, when they realized that they faced the weight of the Imperium, they would come to their senses and accept the new reality of the situation. It would require a lot of staff work, but the beginnings of a plan were forming in Harvick's mind. Seeing that Harvick had reached some form of conclusion, Sidal interrupted the warrior's deliberations. "Well, my lord, can you do it?" Harvick sat up straighter in his seat. "Yes, your highness. It can be done." Sidal stood, and Harvick followed suit. "Then I suggest you return to your ship and begin your planning. I expect you to be ready to launch your invasion by the time of my father's birthday. I think Agate would be a suitable present, don't you?" "Indeed, your highness. Most suitable." Chapter 2. Fight or Flight. H-hour minus 5 hours. The Border Patrol corvette Cadiz was slowly making her way along the final leg of her patrol route, which would see her finish a long 2-month tour of the Harbored Zone, the boundary surrounding any star system, beyond which the interstellar Casimir engine could be engaged without fear of the massive invisible gravitational eddies that flowed between planets and stars, ripping an unwary ship and its crew apart. It had been an uneventful patrol for the Cadiz and its complement of 75 crew. There had been no sign of any pirate activity, something which had become more prevalent since the discovery of the rich veins of Redlazore on Agate, the single habitable planet in this system. The sudden influx of miners to extract the precious mineral had led to a boom in the once backward planet's economy. Large corporations had moved in, and overnight the number of cargo ships trafficking between Agate and the sector capital of Doberman, some 8 days sailing at the cruising speed of 4.5 light minutes per hour for a 1,000,000-ton merchantman, had increased 100-fold. The rich pickings that these lumbering merchantmen presented had been too much for a few enterprising privateers who, in their hybrid warships, had targeted them as they dragged themselves clear of the Harbored Zone and entered the relative safety of faster-than-light travel. Hence the presence of the League of Planets Border Patrol in the space surrounding Agate. The arrival of Rear Admiral Louise Alderman and her 6th Independent Cruiser Squadron had been enough to scare off all but the most ardent privateer, especially since Admiral Alderman was a firm believer in the death penalty for piracy and did not shrink from enforcing it. A combination of the Border Patrol light cruisers riding escort for merchantmen and the vid images of convicted pirates hanging from public gallows had made the Agate system a peaceful place once more. A fact that Commander Torborg was grateful for. He, along with the men and women of the Border Patrol, had bigger fish to fry. Agate was located on the edge of human and K'Tai space, and the millennia-old K'Tai Imperium had no love for the fresh-faced humans whom they saw as the new kids on the block. The scarceness of Redlazore, the key mineral in the manufacture of the Casimir engine, within human-controlled space, had been the only thing restraining human expansion. Redlazore was so expensive and rare that only the military and the richer corporations could afford it, and as such they had a virtual monopoly on interstellar travel. The League had been in negotiations for years with the K'Tai to secure access to their supplies of the mineral, but the K'Tai had been dragging their feet. But now, with the virtually unlimited supply of Redlazore on Agate, there would be no holding back human expansion throughout the galaxy, something which the K'Tai were taking a very dim view of if the latest vid reports were to be believed. As the lowly commander of a Border Patrol corvette, Torborg might not have access to the latest classified intelligence available to Battlefleet, but the K'Tai had walked away from the trade negotiations, and it looked like they had no intention of returning any time soon. In a vain attempt to chase away a burgeoning yawn, Torborg heaved himself from his seat, only to find himself suddenly and violently flung to the deck plates as the Cadiz bucked wildly. "Report!" he screamed as he tried to get to his feet, only to be picked up as if by some invisible hand and launched into the back of the helmsman's chair as the Cadiz lurched sideways.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?